Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Political No Brainer, the podcast where we move past winner takes all politics and into real conversations. I'm Jeff Rabinowitz, and this season we're bringing in voices from all sides to challenge assumptions, bridge divides, and build a better understanding of today's biggest issues. And I am really glad and excited to have Lura Forcum come on today. And Laura, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce your group, and let's see what's going on. Let's talk about how we can possibly improve all of the dissension and all of the hard feelings we have here in America from both sides. And
Absolutely.
so go ahead. Yeah, I'm really thanks for coming on, Laura. Go ahead, Laura. Go ahead.
Thanks. So my name's Lura Forcum. I'm the president of the Independent Center. We are a new group that is trying to get independents to participate in politics, to engage politically. Um, and we do that through education primarily. We are a nonprofit 501(c)(3), and so we're talking to these voters. We also spend a lot of time researching them and things like polling and focus groups because we think it's really important to understand independence and help them get engaged politically. My background is actually in consumer psychology. I spent 7 years as a marketing professor. And what I realized in the kind of the course of my career is that the thing that excites me is getting normal people to talk about public policy. And I think that can be a hard sell because a lot of people don't see how it relates to their everyday lives. But to me, the thing that is really important is public policy is how we kind of hash out where our values are different and where they align. And so if we can get people to talk about what's important to them and how to like rank these things, how do we think about trade-offs, then we just need more voices in that process because we need people to feel heard and understood and supported through public policy. But like you said, we're in this like winner takes all kind of environment, especially in recent years. And it's so destructive. It's actually the opposite of that process of like, we don't have to have the same values. We just need to talk about our values and find ways that we can live together and flourish together. And the current system does not do that because it's so partisan.
So what's incredible is, and I think for the first time in my 40, 50 years of being really interested in politics, is I give credit to Donald Trump for engaging people that, like,
Mm-hmm.
just like you said, normal people are now discussing public policy. And I give him credit for that. And I hate to say it, and I hate to be, because I've never given him credit before, and I don't think I will anytime soon. But that is something he's gotten people into. But what we've gotten into is we've gotten into a situation, and I call it, it's winner takes all politics, but it's even worse. It's winner takes all back takes back all. It's become
Mm-hmm.
winner takes back all. So my question has always been, I understand there's friction between every ordinary people and the government. There's friction between the growing chasm of rich and poor. I understand that. People are getting significant. The rich are controlling 91% of the rich are controlling 99% of the wealth. That's an issue. That is not something that Washington can solve. What,
Mm-hmm.
what what we've seen is we've seen over the past 50 years, we've grown the New Deal over and over and over again. We continue to grow the New Deal with Obamacare. We expanded Medicaid with but even under George Bush, who was a Republican, he called it a gentler, kinder conservatism.
Mm-hmm.
He created the Plan B or Plan D drug plan for Medicare. So it was a significant increase in an entitlement program. It was $1 trillion increase. So now you've got this wrecking ball. You've got this guy that comes in and says, we're taking it all back. And
Mm-hmm.
I've said, if you're going to roll back, not to quote Kmart or any of them, but if you're going to roll back, go slowly. We've literally gotten to a situation. I keep using this essentially as a metaphor where we're at the point where Meals on Wheels has just been crushed. And there's people with dementia who don't
Mm-hmm.
even realize their meals are no longer coming.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, well, good, great. Thankfully, it's an executive order. In 4 years, we can turn it back. In 4 years, you're not going to get those people back to the kitchens overnight. You're not going to get the food supplies back to the kitchens overnight. So my point is how do we get past the wrecking ball? How do we get past the feeling that the wrecking ball is the necessary evil because it's
Mm-hmm.
it's bad.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the thing that to me seems most important here is to get Congress back doing its job, keeping like, wanting to own and use its power of the purse, right, to make fiscally sound decisions instead of leaving it up to the executive branch to have a wrecking ball, like you said. Um, I think I think it's hard for normal people to maybe spot the influence of some of these federal dollars in their daily lives. But yeah, just like you said, Meals on Wheels is feeding hungry people who otherwise are not able to feed themselves. It's not a massive program, but for the people who need it, it's really important. I think about Head Start providing childcare for people who are maybe entry level workers, right? And so if you're somebody who doesn't use Head Start childcare, but who employs people who do use it, you're going to see an impact on your ability to hire workers, right? Because they're not going to be able to get childcare. They can't come to work. And so I think there are so much more constructive ways that we could be looking at efficiency because yeah, we don't need to be out there growing the size of government willy-nilly, like giving handouts. But on the other hand, where there are vulnerable people to say we're going to save money at their expense, I don't think that is the way, that's not the way I want to live in democracy, right? I want government to have a safety net feature so that we can all feel like, we're not going to leave people behind who can't fend for themselves. But I totally agree. This wrecking ball approach is just really reckless. And there are better ways to go about it. And where it's being done through executive order, it's just going to swing back in 4 years. And it's not just that the wrecking ball is unproductive, it is that the uncertainty that this creates in the environment, right? Like if you're a small business owner and you're going, well, gee, I thought I had a federal grant for this issue, right? For this specific program. I thought my loan was going to be subsidized through the Small Business Administration, right? Like all these things I was counting on, and now I don't know if I can. That's not good for growth, right? Because, it just kind of trickles down to every area of our lives where when things are uncertain, you don't think like, hey, let me expand my business. Let me start my business. Let's have another kid. Let's buy a bigger house, right? Like all of that stuff contracts. And the advantage of having Congress do its role, I think of the word jealously, like I want them to jealously control their power of the purse, and say, hey, no, this is us and we do it responsibly and we don't rely on the executive to control our spending. But having Congress involved would reduce a lot of that uncertainty. It would make slower, lasting improvements.
Yeah, and we need to get back to that. There's been talk of a constitutional crisis. Donald Trump has
Mm-hmm.
bulldozed Congress. And then there's the talk of the richest man ever in the world saying if you defy Donald Trump, at least on our party side, we're going to primary you. So let's explain
Mm-hmm.
primary you. We're going to sponsor a candidate to run against you in the primaries. And for example, you could do that effectively in the House for around $3 million. In the Senate, it could cost $100 million. But he can afford to primary a lot of people. I mean, he bought
Mm-hmm.
Twitter willy-nilly for $40 billion. It was probably valued at $10 billion at the moment he bought it. So he's okay with losing money. We've got a guy that's okay to spend a lot of money on a bunch of crap. Now,
Mm-hmm.
um, so we're in this place. We are in this place. And like you said, it's not entitlement programs, government employment, government contracts are a significant part of our economy. For
Mm-hmm.
example, food stamps. If really food stamps go away, Walmart stock might plummet. And then you've got a
Yeah.
plummet and like you said, retirement accounts. I mean, these I remember the EU was this we decided to make one one currency. And
Mm-hmm.
suddenly countries like Spain and Greece who had no economy really, they were big on entitlements. They had AAA credit ratings. They were a part of this one credit rating.
Right.
And they were borrowing more and more and more and more to fund more and more and more entitlements, more government. When the EU cracked down and said, cut it off, because if you want any more money, you got to get your stuff in order. They
Mm-hmm.
cut it off, and their economy came plummeting worse. And then the EU had to reinvest in their government spending to get things in
Mm-hmm.
order. We're in that role now. We're in America. When people say, the people asked Donald Trump recently, we're predicting
Mm-hmm.
a recession. And he said, I don't
Right.
like to predict things like that. Well, he frequently predicts World War III. I mean, predict a recession for God's sakes. It's there. When you think of if generally the way the information comes is when you think of a recession, you think of General Motors announcing 25,000 layoffs, and that sends shockwaves. Well, the government just announced 2 million layoffs. We're
Hmm.
predicting a recession. I mean, it's coming. And so we're here now. We are here. We've
Hmm.
gotten here. However we've done it, whether it's, and I say sometimes it was COVID that really Democrats lost credibility on. And I and
Hmm.
I I agree with that.
Hmm.
I believe in vaccinations. I strongly believe in vaccinations. I've visited countries where vaccinations are people don't even have the money for them and would love to have them. So I got vaccinated. I never said you have to get vaccinated. I never said that's the best way to, so we really did hurt ourselves as far as credibility when it came to COVID. But how do we fix that? How do we get back to, because I feel like we are going to take the White House back. Possibly we'll take the House back in midterms,
Hmm.
potentially the Senate. But are we going to get ourselves into a situation where we become the reverse wrecking ball, where we start replacing everything and really agitate people more that way than Donald Trump is agitating people this way?
That is a really good question. I agree with you. There's definitely a credibility, and this is, I think, really tricky to untangle. So I agree, like a lot of credibility issues that started around COVID, I think they were compounded in the last election because people, and I saw it on like two key things. So people were saying, hey, we don't feel flush financially, right? Like we feel kind of squeezed. And the Democrats pointed to a bunch of economic indicators and said, "No, you're not. You're fine." Right? Which is actually to me like verging into gaslighting territory, right? When somebody's like, "Hey, I feel this way," and you say, "No, you don't," right? Like that's really hard to make people feel heard or understood or like they're likely to be represented well. And so I think that was really damaging. I think it was a big part of why you didn't see a lot of turnout in favor of Democrats on average. And it's not, of course, it's not like Trump won by a landslide, right? He
No.
didn't. But at the margins, I think it was enough to make people go, well, I don't like either of these options. I also think the talk around Biden's mental capacity didn't help either because it's sort of in the same vein where people are like, I'm not sure how that looks. And they're like, oh, he's the best he's ever been. And you're not loyal if you are questioning his mental capabilities, right? You can't be one of us and question him. And I think on both sides, like that's so much of the narrative that we hear, which is like if you have questions, you're not one of us. You can't have questions as a Democrat. You can't have questions as a Republican. And we work with a lot of voters who are just like, yeah, well, you know what? I have questions. I don't like what I'm seeing on either side. I don't feel at home in either of these parties, but I'd like to participate politically, and that's what we are looking for ways to encourage people to do is to say, you voting, even though you are not part of a party, is actually really good for our overall political well-being because it's great to have people that the parties can't count on because then the parties have to actually offer them something that is what they want. And when you just have this sort of like base of partisans who support you no matter what you do, that's exactly how we get into the situation where we are now. The base is the ones who say, "You're right, we don't have any questions. You're right, everything you say is totally accurate." And it's these moderate, independent voters who are kind of swinging back and forth. And I think what they are telling people, the mandate I see that Republicans got in this election is do something about affordability and inflation. It wasn't a mandate that's a big social mandate, right? It wasn't a mandate that said go cut down the size of government. It was a mandate that said we would like to feel flush again. And so I think you're right that if Republicans misunderstand that mandate, they're really going to be in trouble in the midterms. I suspect we will see a swing back towards Democrats because I think right now this administration seems to people like it is not being responsive to the body politic, right? It's only being responsive to its base. And that's not what it means to be an elected representative in Congress, in the White House. You're the president of the entire country. You are a senator or representative for your district or your state, but you are not there just for your party.
So what you're doing is absolutely incredible. And let's be clear, the undecided voter, the independent voter is who decided this election. So I try to explain
Absolutely.
this. I try to explain this to people. So I try to explain it in very basics. When you have a Democrat and you have a Republican, they're both going to reach 220 electoral votes. There's almost no doubt. The demographics have never changed enough to change that fact. Then you've got how do you get to 270? You get to 270 with the 7 swing states. Now you've got this notion, like you said, it was a marginal victory. People are saying Trump won all 7 swing states. He did, but somewhere by 1.5%. Those independent voters said, one, you deceived us. You told us Biden was fine. He came on a debate. He looked terrible. That's all I'm going to say. He looked
Hmm.
terrible. Okay. Then the White House made a statement by 9 o'clock. He's spent. That wasn't their statement, but essentially it was their statement. Well, the president needs to be alert at 2 a.m., woken up at 2 a.m. So we've got a big concern here that at 9 o'clock he's done for. Okay. And
Hmm.
I didn't ask any other questions, and I had that same concern. Then the president decides to drop out and gives Kamala Harris 90 days to do this extraordinary task. It can't be done in 90 days. She did better than anybody could have been expected. But then came the swing voters. Then came the voters we're talking about right now. And they said, you know what? At this point, it's better the devil you know. I can't do this no more. I
Hmm.
can't do this. It was not a significant victory. We knew he's nuts. We knew he's coming back for revenge. Revenge is his thing, it's his jam. It's his whole life.
Yeah.
We knew it, but they didn't. They couldn't do Kamala Harris. One, she wasn't clear on any issue, like you said. Oh, it's. She was even asked on the View, "Would you do anything different?" No. Well, then I'm concerned. Oh, you're not going to do anything different. I'm dying here. I got 2 kids. I'm fine with my share of the bounty. The problem is it keeps going down. I mean, it's concerning that you just said no. You wouldn't do a single, do something different. Just say, yeah, I would do. You know, even though you're bashing the guy maybe you really care for, but this is business, and this is America's business. This is 300 million people's business. This isn't a
Hmm.
small business with 2 investors. This is everybody's on the line here. She said, no, I'm not doing anything different. But my point is, where I'm landing at, is how do we get independent voters to hold to say to Democrats, if you want our vote, how do we get them to make them realize what you want the party to change into, to morph
Hmm.
into? Because the party at this point is dysfunctional. It's
Hmm.
it's more dysfunctional than the Republicans. Republicans think Trump made it more dysfunctional than themselves. It's not true. There is that
That's
unity in the
yeah,
Republican Party.
that's really interesting. That's been one of the things that's really struck me over the past couple of years is that, for the effect that Donald Trump has had on the Republican Party, which I feel like he has, in a lot of ways pulled it away from values you would traditionally associate it with, like fiscal responsibility, right? And small limited government and the rule of law. Um, it's interesting to me that the Democratic Party didn't flourish in that environment. They actually have become sort of derailed and pulled away from their values by him too. And I think it's because they have been so busy kind of pointing at him and saying, well, who are we? We're not that guy. Right. And to them, that's enough. To voters, it's not enough, right? Like you can't just not be something. You have to offer a positive vision of what you are going to create in the world. And I think Donald Trump has spoken that to Republican voters in a way that resonates with them. He is going to be their revenge. That's what he says. He is going to make them wealthy. And Democrats are offering like, well, at least we're not that guy. And then I'm like, but what are you offering? Right? Like, show me a vision. And they have really, it's like they've been pulled away from their own need to create policy proposals that really resonate with voters. And I think actually, I don't know that voters are excited anymore by the offer of more hand more handouts, more entitlements, more money, because I think they're starting to see that the effect that say COVID stimulus had was like kind of like a sugar rush where like it feels really good to get money in the mail in the moment, but then we're starting to see like inflationary effects and we're seeing what the deficit looks like. And we know the bill's going to come due, especially if you're a younger voter. You know that this is going to come home and land with you and your financial well-being.
Right. And like, so it's like you said, what this is what I believe people think Donald Trump offers. So again, I say metaphorically, but I'm just using an example. I'm driving up I-4. I live in Florida. Driving up I-4, I see this truck. This truck is so old that between the cab and the back, it's like folding. And he's got like a pressure cleaner, a mop bucket, a ladder, I don't know, garden tools. And he's got a Trump 2020 Make America Great Again or Greater Again or 2024 and I'm like, how do you feel Donald Trump is going to improve your financial status? Now, I'm not knocking a hardworking man. I know you're going to have
Yeah.
your $300 days, but how do you feel he's going to make your life significantly better? And like you said, he doesn't want a handout.
Hmm.
There was I think it was Truman or somebody said they want a hand up. How is Trump going to give you that hand up? Do you think that tax return is going to make you? His tax policies are based on the rich, are for the very, very wealthy, for the
Hmm.
big corporations. They don't understand that. But even if the economy booms under Trump, do you think this one man with this old truck is suddenly going to have 5 trucks, 20 employees? But he
Hmm.
thinks it.
Yeah, I
So
think that's when you ask voters too, like what can the what would you want the president to do for you? It's a really interesting question because I wonder what is in their minds. Because it's like, yeah, he does. If you don't want a check, then like is the expectation just sort of that you will grow the economy such that my business takes off and I'm better off? Is it like I'm going to pay fewer taxes? Maybe that's the expectation, but I do think voters just kind of go on this like global gut feel of who do you trust, right? And I think when you tell people that their perceptions of reality aren't accurate the way the Democrats do, you don't get this feeling of trust. You sort of go like, I don't, I don't really believe what you're saying, so I'm not going to trust you, right? And so rather than I think people feeling like there are specific policy actions the president, whoever it is, could take that would make me materially better off. I don't think that they think that. I think that they just look at somebody and say, "Do I trust them?" And for whatever reason, people find Donald Trump very trustworthy. I think, he acknowledges their concerns. He's really good at understanding people's sort of like deeper need to feel heard and validated and saying, like, yeah, I see how you feel and how you feel is right.
Well, he did an incredible job with that. So he's trustworthy
Yeah.
because he's not trustworthy. That's what he's okay.
Yes.
He's okay
It's
with it.
amazing.
He makes it
Yeah.
clear I'm not trustworthy.
Yeah.
They said it in a debate. And again, I always find myself trouble quoting things, but they said you don't pay taxes or in some sort of discussion, he said because I'm
Hmm.
smart. And you know
Hmm.
what? Truthfully, he wasn't breaking the laws when he wasn't paying tax. The developer's tax code is very specific to his business, and it made him very rich.
Yes.
So he his the fact that he is and that's what I said to many Democrats when I was circling around. I said, stop with the integrity issue. Stop with the salacious behavior. Because here's a simple fact. Tim Cook took over Apple after Steve Jobs died. It's the biggest company in the world. Nobody asked a single thing about his personal behavior. He's literally one of the few gay CEOs in the 500, and nobody even knows that. But everything about Donald Trump, we know personally everything we know. I says, you know what? You're right. None of this is. I paid a porn star. Okay, what's the point? Does it make me a bad
Hmm.
president? Does it make me a bad businessman? No. So but how do we convince Democrats to say, because we have unsavory Democrats that always hide and
Hmm.
run. They always, and then they lie. We had John Edwards, was it, who was having an affair on his
Hmm.
very sick, very loving wife.
Hmm.
Disgusting behavior. I'm not advocating it at all. I'm just saying stop Democrats. This is my point to that one statement I
Hmm.
just made. Stop making yourselves bigger than Republicans. You're
Hmm.
not. You're just as
Hmm.
bad, and we all know it. So how do we come up with an independent candidate who's going to have certain behavioral problems that'll just be own up to them?
Hmm. I mean, It's a great question. And I think the idea of an independent presidential candidate, even, my role at the Independent Center, I don't think we should hang our hat on a single individual, right? Like I don't think it can be a problem that's solved by just one person. I think what we need is more political participation. And the issue right now is that for most people, it has become really unpleasant to participate in politics because there's so much contempt in the conversation, right? Like if you don't agree with me, then it's not just that we don't agree, it's that you're a bad person. And this is untenable for democracy. We cannot govern ourselves like this. And to me, one of the things that's really interesting is that where it is so contentious and so unpleasant is primarily in US Congress, right? It's the presidency. That is where our conversation has gotten so destructive. It is so just it's contemptuous, it's nasty. But if you get back to local politics, right? Like in my county and my town council, we have to make sure that the school's running and that like we have elections and that the road is paved and that the trash gets picked up, right? And so it's like we can only be so horrendous to each other because at the end of the day, we bump into each other at the grocery store. Like we want the school to be open, we want our kids to be educated. And so it's like I think it's really interesting the fact that we can get along with each other fine here at local and state levels of government, and it's really the federal system where it's so removed it doesn't seem to affect our daily lives, and that's where we choose to be just incredibly nasty. And it works. It gets media views and clicks. It gets campaign donations. It's really effective. And I think it's going to take just normal people kind of saying like, no, you know what, if you want my vote, you'll have to earn it. And I'm not supporting candidates who are just nasty, right? Like I want decent people. That's what I hear from people and in our audience that I talk to is I want somebody decent. I don't actually care what their political party is. I just want decent people in office. We need to be supporting decent people, and we need to make it clear to candidates who aren't decent that like no, I'm not for a party or a person above the larger principle of I want good people who are public servants, not who are in it for themselves, not who are out to score points and obstruct the other side, right? Like I want you to govern. I want you to act like a leader. We just did some polling. It was really interesting. So the Independent Center does quite a bit of polling because we think, it's really important to understand people of all political stripes, but especially independents. So we did a poll in January, right before the inauguration, because we look at our work as promoting accountability for elected officials. And so if you want to be accountable, then like we need to know what do people expect from elected officials, especially Trump and Congress. So we measured that prior to the inauguration to have like a clean slate, right? And we'll keep updating it over time and see like what do people want and do they feel like they're getting it. So in our polling, what came back was across the board, people want to see leadership. And I don't think being contemptuous and obstructive is leadership in most people's minds. So we know they want leadership. They also want bipartisanship in our survey across the board. Support for bipartisan governing was tremendous. And I think it's because people are really tired of this kind of infighting. It's not democratic. It's not American. It's winner take all is not what we're about as individuals or as a country.
So not at all. And this is an incredible point you just made. So when you talk about let's get back to the micro, let's forget the macro, let's forget the
Mm-hmm.
president, let's forget the Senate, let's forget the House. An incredible thing happened. President Obama was president for 8 years. He was an articulate man. He was extremely intelligent. I think the most condescending term Republicans would use is Professor Obama. That's not really a bad term. It's really not.
Right.
I mean, call me Professor Jeff. Nobody will, but I'll be okay with it. But, but, um, But during that same 8 years, Democrats, now I focus on Democrats for 1 second because I'm going to get back to you, lost 1,000 local seats in government across the country. And they were replaced with Republicans. Now there is a new focus because I am on the inside of the Democratic Party here, right, in my small existence, that we're going to get a candidate in every seat in local government. That's the new focus. Now, I know your group may still be new and may still be small, but I think it would be incredible to get an independent candidate in every race and across the country, not necessarily president, because
Hmm.
that becomes a situation where you're nearly at a point where you've got to spend $1.5 billion. To me, that's another outrage of mine. I'm like, take the $3 billion and give it to St. Jude's Children's Hospital because I'm tired of listening to y'all's nonsense. But
Hmm.
but you, we're at a point where it would be something if 1,000 independents were to run across the country in local government. It would be incredible if that happened. And that's what I want to see
Absolutely.
happen. In my little neighborhood, I live in Groveland, Florida. In my little town, we have a new mayor who worked for a company I work for, and he was a chef, and his particular role was difficult. I knew he would be a good mayor. I don't know if he's a Democrat or a Republican. All I know is the few things I've asked him to do, he's done. Like we had a
Hmm.
terrible, I guess it was a hurricane. There was trees everywhere. I did my own tree cleaning, but there was this pile 6 feet high by 20 feet wide of trees. I said, "When are you guys picking it up?" He said, "It's a big task." And then I think I badgered him enough to the point where he sidelined everybody and came through my whole entire neighborhood because he couldn't
Hmm.
necessarily just come to my house. That would not be
Hmm.
good. But it did seem like it happened fairly quickly after I called him the 11th time. But he's done other good things. He's done other good, really good things. And I could say maybe he is, for all I know, he could be an independent. For all I know, he has a party affiliation, but he thinks independently.
Hmm.
But that would be incredible if we start there because
Hmm.
you get this Green Party in the presidential race, or Jill Stein was saying, "I want the spot Kamala got. Kamala got it. Let it
Hmm.
go. We know this is done. This is not your thing. It's not. Even if you got it, no one would know when you had it, and we'd have no result anyway. So, but I would love to see independence across the board and just talking like I say some of the. I remember one time, my first time out, somebody asked me, "What is the difference between Republicans and Democrats?" And I said, "Well, generally, Democrats champion the vulnerable, and Republicans work hard to see there's lots more vulnerable." It was the worst thing to ever say. But and then I realized maybe politics isn't my thing. And then everybody's like, about raising money. And we were really falling behind. And I said, I'm really into raising awareness, not money. And then they were like, this isn't our guy. Democrats just said this isn't our guy, which is fine. I didn't necessarily aspire to be their guy. I just necessarily aspired to be an independent thinker. So, and
Hmm.
I would love to see that a lot
Yeah.
more.
That's kind of how we talk about our audience because I think people have been trained by the political parties to think like, oh, am I one of you? And that's what we say is like we just want people who are independent thinkers. And if you look at your ballot and that means you vote straight ticket Republican or straight ticket Democrat, you're still welcome. We just want people participating in politics who are independent thinkers who will look at a policy and say, well, I know that's what, Democrats want, but I'm not really sure that that's what's best, right? People to really force both sides to come up with better policy proposals because in the end, that's what makes people's lives better or worse. And you were talking at the beginning about just how complicated all of this cutting is that Doge is doing. And that's the thing that I think everybody should keep in mind is that the economy is incredibly complex. And for all the information and study that we do about the state of the US economy, what are the drivers of growth? What are things limiting growth? For all the study that we do and all the data, it's still way too complex to really model accurately. And that's why policies have unintended consequences. So if you want good policy, you need two voices or three with independence, right? Having a conversation about how do we create a policy that gets us the things we want. And instead, what we have right now is a conversation that sounds like, let's do this. No, that's the worst thing in the world. The end.
And
And
could you,
right, like that's a
right.
dumb way to get public policy because this stuff is complex. I mean, I could point to you 10 different examples of places where we thought, hey, we can fix this, right? Like with COVID. So look at COVID. all we could do is follow the recommendations of the scientists who were doing the best they could at that time. But when we look back at some of the decisions we made, it's like, okay, we got that wrong, right? The best people are trying their best, and we still got things wrong. Stimulus we needed, but it had inflation. People are wearing masks, which maybe didn't really limit the spread and may have had other effects on people's immune systems, right?
Right.
So it's like, this is how complicated it is, not just COVID, but all kinds of policy areas. And if we're going to get the best policy that we can, we need like a robust conversation from two sets of good actors who are saying, yes, we want to create the best plan. We want to fix policies that we made and were wrong about, right? But like, as long as it's winner take all, like, I need to win because then you'll lose, or I hate to see you win. This
Right.
is
That's
just
where
like
that was my
so
thing is
unproductive.
my thing was I can't imagine Donald Trump's going to win. Didn't have a great feeling about Kamala. I was a little concerned when she said she's not going to do anything different, but I just didn't want Donald
Mm-hmm.
Trump. But when you say two conversations with two people, I love the idea of conversations with three people, and I love the idea of that third person being the one people say, I really like him, because that
Mm-hmm.
would freak out the other two, and we know who are
Mm-hmm.
saying the other two are the Democrat and the Republican. The Independent is the one that's going to come out and be the one people like, I really like him, and that movement could
Mm-hmm.
grow and change everything. As
Mm-hmm.
an independent, I always say we can fix everything with a bigger investment in education. I talk about there's a book Robert Kiyosaki wrote about Rich Dad Poor Dad. He talks
Mm-hmm.
about how you can work for money or you can make money work for you. And I would love to see that as a part of our education system. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that is never been discussed by either a Republican or a Democratic candidate. So then comes the crazy independent, which not necessarily is me any longer. So I'm kind of running out of time, but for any big moves. Um, but this is incredible that your organization is doing this. Charles Koch wrote a book from the bottom up. He talks about that. He talks about social entrepreneurs. He talks about
Mm-hmm.
though it's the independence that can make the difference.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how we screwed the pooch on COVID and how we missed so many steps. And I talked about it. I said New York City was mandating you hibernate, and they were finding out the recycled air in the buildings was causing more COVID than the people that were walking around Central Park. And I was
Yeah.
like, how did we miss that step? And like you said, it was the scientists doing their due diligence, doing what they knew to do, but they were getting it wrong
Mm-hmm.
routinely.
And
And
and it's like, I guess I point that out to say that even when we have experts, even when we're doing our best, we're still going to get it wrong because the world is a complicated place, and it's not as simple as I can fix the economy by mailing people checks, right? It's also not as simple as I can fix the economy by shutting down large swaths of the federal government. Like, those are just, the world is too complicated for those kind of policy solutions. So it's like, if we're gonna get to policy that really like enables people to live their lives in a way that they can feel like they are prosperous, feel like they can achieve the things that are important to them. That's the kind of policy environment I think that we need. And that's what I want politicians to be proposing, is policies that let people choose how to live their lives, how to build their lives. And, instead of assuming that it can sort of be planned or designed by one top-down person, right? Like, people know how to do incredible things. I think that's one of the really inspiring things that you see and you saw in COVID and sometimes in disaster response is like, local people will get together and solve problems. And they do it in creative ways, they do it in really incredible ways. They build something that is more effective and more responsive than somebody in DC could ever do. And so I think we need to unleash people to sort of create policy and live their lives in that way. And the two parties are invested in maintaining power and, growing power. And that's not the same thing as creating an environment where individuals can be empowered.
See, that's incredible. I think back to a story, and it's probably not a real story, but it seemed good to me. It was there was this tractor trailer driving through the Midtown Tunnel in New York City. He miscalculated the clearance, and his truck got stuck. And there was all kinds of engineers talking about how to move the tunnel, and there was a child who said, "Why don't we just let the air out of the tires?" And it was, that was a great. I don't really think it happened that way, but who knows? Maybe it did. Maybe that child is gonna call me and say, "I can't believe you discredited me," but who knows?
I've heard
But
that story. I love that story.
yeah, that was a great story, and I don't know if it's true, and it's fine with me if it's not. I'll say it's true. I'll stick to it. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. But here's my, and this is incredible what you're doing because this answered my big question because I don't necessarily, and I'm gonna eat my words on this one. I don't want to see 1,000 Democrats gain back those seats that we lost. I would like to see 1,000 independents gain back those seats that we lost. So,
Yeah.
this is incredible. So here's my question because, um where is your organization in size and scope now? Because I hope that you'll be willing to come back on the show sometime. And
Yeah,
what?
I'm anytime, would love to. We have about there are about 10 of us who are full-time employees. We work with some contractors, so maybe about 20 people altogether. We'd like to grow the organization. We are hopeful that we can create in the future that some of the folks that work with us can build out a PAC or a C4 that could be more involved in political fundraising because of course what we can't do as a C3 is actually support candidates. um, but but this idea of supporting independents who run for office is absolutely something that we think is really important to develop in the future because we need candidates who are not beholden to a party. And there's so many policies that the parties have arranged to sort of protect themselves from competition over time. It makes it really hard to run and win as an independent. We need open primaries. We may need campaign finance reform. There's just a lot of ways where the cards or the deck is stacked in favor of the political parties, and it helps them protect themselves from competition. And we think they need competition. It shouldn't. Why should you have a choice between two parties? Right? Like to the person who represents you best. We think actually competition is the thing and choice is the thing that makes people better off because if you're forced to compete for voters, you will have to get closer to what they want, which means their needs are better met. They feel heard and represented. But as long as you can just kind of stay where you are, which both parties kind of do, right? They just kind of cross their arms and say, well, we're Democrats and the independents are going to come back sooner or later. And the Republicans do the same thing.
And this time
And
the
I don't think
Republicans?
that's true.
No, it's not. I would love to see. And the other thing is too is that well, this time the independents are really who made the decision, but not in a big way. But we
Hmm.
needed them to not make the decision, to change the other candidates, to change the way the two candidates think, or possibly win.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's my hope now. That's my new hope now as we get to that point because I've got a good friend, Banks Helfrich, who's been on this show. He's an independent. He's got great ideas. But the
Hmm.
challenge is, you know, the challenge is prevailing against the Democrat and the Republican, and we need to
Hmm.
change that. And that's why I say, when you're talking about there should be finance reform, there should be easier ways for independents to raise money because there's certainly a lot of money in the funnels for Republicans and Democrats.
Absolutely. The impact of money in that process is just incredible. And incredible in a bad way. Um, I think, you know, it's one of the things I hear people saying. So this kind of gets back to my background. Everything they do is in your interest because they feel like you're in group. They're not your in group. That's how I look at when I look at political parties, when I look at elected officials, I just kind of go, you know what? They're not there for me. They're there for themselves. They're there for some special interest, but they're not there for me. And I want government that's there to make life better for everybody, not for me at the expense of somebody else, but better across the board.
That's incredible because again, I have another real life example. I have a friend that has a car auto service, and he's really good at it. When you go there, you sit in this break room or this waiting room, and there's snacks and there's waters and so it really takes me a minute to get to this point, but so Warren Buffett calls it a moat, an emotional connection to a business, is essentially what a moat is.
Mm,
And I said people are going to have that connection to your business. One day somebody might take that car to you to be detailed, and they'll take it on their first date, that newly cleaned car on their first date, and that's the girl they marry. So then I got to my point, and this is where I'm landing. I said, but you're having trouble now. Well, a lot of times big business will open, just say restaurants, and project they won't make money for 5 years. And they have the funding to do that. I said the small business should be funding you to survive this 5 years, and then you're going to have this incredible business. But the first 3 years, you're going to lose your house. He's at that
hmm
point. And I said, so if there was an independent said we're going to grow the small business to really prop up small business again, not do what it's doing, prop up big business with millions and millions of dollars of loans because they know how to navigate the system. Because he
hmm
said, I've been to the small businesses, it's just impossible to understand what they expect from me. The
hmm
business plan is too much for me to do. Forget about the other steps that are coming after that. And I said, we need to, so imagine that he's on the in group. He's a Republican. Republicans are on business. They're big
Right,
on business. They're going to save me. They're
right,
not going to save you. They're going to
right.
prop up a big business that's going to cannibalize you. There's going
Yeah.
to be a national chain of detailing companies. I saw one pop up in my neighborhood. It's a national chain. It's a giant place, and that they got their funding from some Republican policy. And so we need to get people to understand that neither the Republicans or the Democrats are on our side anymore. There
hmm
really is this notion from my point of view that both parties are really want to see a giant underclass, because for the Democrats, generally speaking, it's their voter base. For the Republicans, it's their lower cost labor. But but they're neither party's on your side anymore. So, and that's
hmm
the in-group algorithm. I'm in with the Dems because they sent me $600 during COVID. Well, how far did that get you? Yeah, it got you
Yeah.
groceries for possibly 3 weeks, but that's not enough. It's not
Right.
good enough, you know. And and I just it's always been my question is how do we improve the Democratic Party? And I kind of come to the conclusion there's not a lot of chance of that because
hmm
they're really looking at this moment to retake everything from the House, the Senate, and the White House, and then go counter everything
hmm
Donald Trump did and bigger, and then we're back to the same negativity that we're
Exactly. We're
back to
just
the
gonna have a
same.
pendulum, right, that swings back and forth where, one party takes power, they make a bunch of temporary changes, the other party gets power back and makes a bunch of changes, and there's no corrective force that says, hey, why don't you be more responsive to what we want? Why don't you govern in our favor instead of maintaining power? So it's hard, right? Like this is a complicated system. There's a lot of entrenched interests, and it's hard to work within to make the parties be responsive or make the system be responsive. To me, the best option really is to get independent voters to make their voices heard on whatever issue. Call your elected official, like you're saying, you called the mayor. I mean, call your
He
state
really did. He
officials.
bypassed a lot to do the whole
Yeah,
my whole development, if you will. But because
yeah.
if
I
he'd
mean,
just come to
call
get my
right.
house, that would have been
Like
something.
call them and say, "Hey, I voted for you. You were talking about affordability. What are you guys doing? I don't see anything happening. I want to know what you're doing about affordability." So, call them when you're looking at the ballot instead of saying like, "Oh, I'm just going to trust that my guys will do stuff that benefits me." Like, let's look at what the actual policies are and whether those are things that are going to make you better off, because both parties have their fair share of bad ideas. So that's where we need people to really like force the issue and say, no, explain to me how this policy is going to let me make decisions about my life and my business. Explain to me how this policy is going to make me better off, because I don't see it.
Yeah. You know, I always, people talked about Donald Trump's first term because it's kind of getting to the point you just made where they felt like he was a great success. And I said, generally speaking, we switch gears every 4 to 8 years. Donald Trump didn't do anything during his first term. He didn't know how to do anything. So basically, he rode on the coattails of Obama's policy. So for the first time in history, we had a consistent 12 years. That's how he
Hmm.
became such a success story. But we're still, no matter what Donald Trump did or President Obama did, it really didn't help the individual in a lot of ways. It really did prop up big business under between those 12 years. You saw still this growth. I talk about all the time how small business is just getting ate up by big business. Amazon is eating up all the local pharmacies.
Hmm.
Allegedly they're kind of contemplating a drone program that holds one size package up to 5 pounds. That's prescriptions. They're
Hmm.
gonna start dropping prescriptions in your front yard and eat up all
Wow.
all the community based. And that was and that's all a lot. So the idea of, again, can we get small business involved in big business? Can we get the small business administration involved? That's kind of my independent thinking, involved in propping up the small businessman,
Hmm.
or so he can survive what big business is doing to eat him up. and
Hmm.
and it's a neither party's going to do any of that. So
Yeah. I mean, I look at it like I don't want the government picking the winners, right? And
right,
it seems to me that what happens is if you're able to make really significant contributions to an elected official, that makes it more likely that you get picked as a winner, right? Like you get policies that are favorable to you and unfavorable to your competitors. And that makes everybody worse off, right?
right,
Because if it's a single company dominating an industry, they don't have to be very responsive to consumer needs. That's what happens where you have a monopoly. It's why the US government has broken up monopolies over time, is because that makes consumers worse off. So, we don't need monopolies in politics, we don't need them in government. We I want a legal and a political and a regulatory environment that isn't saying, hey, we're going to protect you and insulate you from the effects of competition. We're going to let you set the rules so that you don't have to play by the same rules everybody else does. That to me is just, that's not what the United States is about.
no. And I love that. I really do. I think that's incredible. That what you're doing is incredible. I think, because we can go on and on, believe me, but I think
Yes, we can.
no, but I want to do this again. I think you said maybe possibly you would be willing to. I'll definitely stay in touch with Justin,
Yeah, absolutely.
and then maybe even at some point directly with you. I can email you at your organization if you want. You can email me, and
Yeah, absolutely. I
I
think
think go
I,
ahead.
I dropped you an email a little bit earlier, so because I was having trouble with the Zoom link. So you're connected to me and to Justin, but I'm happy
Oh, I'll look for
to
that
chat
email. I haven't.
anytime.
Yeah, you can email me at politicalnobrainer.com at Gmail.
Oh, okay.
Politicalnobrainer at gmail.com as well.
Okay,
Political
cool.
no brainer. Yeah, but I'll look for that. I didn't see that. I was having trouble connecting. I'm like, man, I gotta get on. I was a little frustrated.
I know. I wasn't sure I was in the right place. Sometimes I click the Zoom link and I'm not in the right place. So
No, but
um,
I'm glad we got it
yeah.
figured out because I was getting a little concerned too. I was like, I texted Justin, I'm ready.
You're like, what are you doing? Well,
No,
thank
no,
you
it
for
was
being
me.
patient with me.
No, thanks for being patient with me. This was great. No, no, it was all me.
Yeah.
I'm technically lost. I mean,
Well, you're running a podcast, so you can't be that lost.
no, 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 I'm getting it. I'm definitely figuring it all out. But I have my 11-year-old. He helps me too. You just saw him probably a little bit ago out right back
Yeah.
there.
Oh, that's cool. How old are your kids?
11 and 17.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
My,
And I'm nearly 60, so I started late, but I'm happy with
okay.
it. I love being a
There
dad.
you
It's
go.
cool. It's really
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm so glad we got to connect.
Oh yeah, that was fabulous. I love what you do. This is great. I really appreciate this was incredible. You've been an incredible guest. Thank you so
Well, thank
much.
you
Well,
so much.
my pleasure, really. My pleasure. Well, like, share, subscribe, comment.
All
Lura
right.
Forcum and can you talk about your organization just real quick, a website and all
Sure.
that?
So the Independence Center is at www.independencecenter.org. We have a website. We have a bunch of resources for independent voters. If you're curious about making sure that you are registered to vote correctly in your state, since it is different in every state, we try to keep resources updated so you'll know. For example, in some states, there is no party registration. In other states, they might label you something a little bit unexpected. So we just want people to be able to be registered to vote and be confident that they're registered in the way that reflects their views. We have some information about different policies. We have our polling. We have a weekly newsletter. So if you just want to kind of stay up to date with what we're doing and what's happening in the space, if you go to our website, it's the very top thing you'll see. Just asks for your email, and we'll send you a weekly email about what's going on. And yeah, we love to hear from people. So you can also email us through that website. And we are just we like talking to independents. So if there's something that's on your mind, you have questions about policy or running for office, whatever, we'll connect you to the resources that we have. We're just here to support independence.
That's beautiful. That's incredible. That's what we need to get more of, more happening. Really, 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 we need to have more of that. And I'm actually set up for the email, which I haven't done yet, but I will.
Awesome.
And it's been incredible. It's a pleasure meeting you. It's a pleasure talking to you, and I will be emailing you and talking to you soon.
All right, same here. Take care.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you.
Thanks.